1.6 Ti-VCT 110 horsepower, RHBA, 1.6 Ti-VCT 120 horsepower, KGBA, PNBA. The base engine for the Mondeo 4 is an unremarkable 1.6-liter naturally aspirated engine. This engine can be called resourceful if you don't save much on engine oil. Yes, it can rustle the pistons when cold, but this usually does not lead to major repairs. 2.0 Duratec 145 horsepower, AOBC, TBBB, AOBA, TBBA. 2.3 Duratec 160 horsepower, SEBA. Gasoline 4s with a displacement of 2.0 and 2.3 liters are also good. Typically, attention is needed to classic consumables. Ignition coils, which are best replaced as a set. The throttle valve will not refuse to be cleaned if stuttering and biting appear during acceleration. The plastic valve cover gasket can leak oil not only to the outside, but also into the spark plug wells. And if the old valve cover is clamped with excessive force, it may burst around the mounting ears. By the way, if you overdo it with screwing the fasteners of the ignition coils, the plastic may burst there too. These engines, especially the 2.3-liter, are also not averse to using motor oil. There have been cases when these engines drank the oil to the bottom, which led to self-destruction. 2.5 turbo Duratec-ST 220 horsepower, HUBA. Sometimes Mondeo 4 is found with a 2.5-liter turbo engine. This is a cool engine with a decent resource. If you monitor the condition of the radiators and diagnose the VCG system using the rubber glove method, then this engine will cover 500,000 kilometers or even more. Keep an eye on the timing belt and camshaft seals. After a mileage of 200,000 kilometers, leaks often occur. 2.0 EcoBoost 200 horsepower, TNBA. 2.0 EcoBoost 240 horsepower, TPWA. A 2-liter turbo engine appeared on the Mondeo 4 after restyling. This engine caused a lot of trouble for both the owners and the company itself. Numerous flashings helped to minimize cases of piston destruction as a result of detonation. This engine requires high-quality correct oil with a viscosity of 5 watts minus 30. 1.8 TDCi Duratorq 100 horsepower, FFBA. 1.8 TDCi Duratorq 125 horsepower, KHBA, QYBA. Mondeo 4 carried over the old 1.8-liter turbo diesel, which is notable for the fact that it has a single camshaft, a cast-iron cylinder head, and no hydraulic compensators in the valve drive. This engine comes from the 1980s, but managed to be awarded the Common Rail system. This engine usually gets good reviews. It is actually simple and unprepossessing, which is why it is resourceful. We advise you to watch it. It contains useful information about the combined timing drive with a secret lower timing belt, which is better replaced with a chain. 2.0 C 115 horsepower, TYBA, LPBA, KLBA. 2.0 C 140 horsepower, UFBA, QXBA, QXBB, UFBB. 2.0 C 163 horsepower, TXBA, TXBB. Diesel engines of 2.0 and 2.2 liters were developed by PSA. Mostly there are versions with power up to 140 horsepower. They have a continental fuel system. The 163 horsepower version is less common, because such cars were brought from Europe. This engine has a Delphi fuel system. It is the cost of solving problems in the fuel system that can scare away injectors worn out by low-quality fuel costs $600. Against this background, a malfunctioning EGR, a worn-out turbine and other problems typical of diesel engines seem completely insignificant. 2.2 TDCi 175 horsepower, QYBA. 2.2 TDCi 200 horsepower, KNBA. The Mondeo 4 with the 2.2-liter turbo diesel is rare. It is based on the same 2-liter turbo diesel with a cast-iron cylinder block, timing belt and inter-camshaft chain. They say that no one knows this motor. In fact, it was installed on Citroën, Peugeot and even the third Outlander. In the longitudinal version, it is found on the Jaguar XF, Land Rover Freelander 2 and Discovery Sport. On the Mondeo 4, it is cured of unpleasant mechanical diseases. Basically, it is plagued by standard troubles with the EGR system, particulate filter and sometimes with a turbocharger. This engine has a timing belt drive. Do not forget to change it every 120,000 kilometers. The Bosch fuel system is not capricious, but if low-quality fuel is installed on the piezo injectors, 0986435434, then you will have to pay $600 for each. IB 5-speed manual transmission. Let's talk about manual transmissions. A 5-speed engine works with a 1.6-liter naturally aspirated engine. Mechanics. This is the weakest transmission, which is in steady demand at showdowns. Mondeo 4 is too heavy for it. as evidenced by the bursting of the satellite axle. Sometimes it makes a hole in the transmission housing. MTX75 6-speed manual transmission, paired with a 1.8-liter turbodiesel and a 2-liter naturally aspirated engine, a much more reliable MTX75 transmission was installed. We advise you to keep it dry. Oil leaks here appear not only along the seals, but also along the rod of the gear selection mechanism. Low oil levels easily lead to wear on this gearbox. M66 6-speed manual transmission, MMT6 6-speed manual transmission, mechanical transmissions paired with 2-liter diesel engines and a 2.5-liter turbo engine are literally flawless. Aisin AF21 6-street manual transmission, all variants of the 2-pedal Mondeo 4 with petrol 4s, with the exception of EcoBoost engines, and versions with French turbodiesels are equipped with the classic AF21 automatic transmission. Its original name is AOBC. It easily runs 300,000 kilometers and even more if you update its ATF every 60,000 kilometers. Powershift 6 DCT 450 MPS 6 EcoBoost turbo petrol engines are partnered with a Powershift robotic transmission. This is a wet clutch unit. It is obviously more resourceful and reliable. However, it is extremely important to change the oil and external filter every 40,000 kilometers. Its sore spot is oil leakage along the front cover. For this cap $1,684,808, you need to save about $400 so as not to face 5 times more expensive repairs later. Dual mass flywheel. Note that literally all Ford Mondeo variants with manual transmissions are equipped with dual mass flywheels. Dual mass flywheels are not available on cars with a 1.6-liter naturally aspirated engine. The same complex flywheels are paired with MPS6 transmissions. Their cost ranges from $300 for the 1.8 TDCi engine to $900 with other engines. Typically, such flywheels last more than 250,000 kilometers. The fuel pump in the Ford Mondeo 4 lasts about 100,000 kilometers and even less if the driver likes to drive on reserve fuel. Under such conditions, the fuel pump overheats. In addition, the electrical connector on it is unsuccessful and the contact in it weakens, which leads to heating of the chip. There were even cases of serious melting of the upper part of the fuel pump housing, and even fires in cars. In any case, if it comes to replacing the fuel pump, the electrical connector on it should be carefully inspected. If there are signs of heating, then the electrical wiring to it should be changed along with the pump. $1,775,982. Wiring to the pump and fuel level sensor costs about $30. A new original fuel pump costs over $1,100. Factory replacement, about $430. Non-original pumps of good quality, about $120. By the way, there is no hatch under the rear seat for access to the fuel pump. According to the instructions, you need to remove the fuel tank. In this case, it is very convenient to change the wire to the pump. Owners often cut a hole in the body under the rear seat in order to have the easiest access to the pump. In winter, there are many cases when the Mondeo 4 hood refuses to open or the cable to the lock breaks off. To prevent this from happening before the winter season, you should thoroughly lubricate the hood lock, and the lubricant should also be applied to the cable. A lot of dirt and moisture gets on the lock. Moisture can seep under the cable jacket and freeze there. The Mondeo 4 with petrol 4s has a rather weak right engine mount. It is hydraulic and usually lasts about 150,000 kilometers. When it wears out, vibrations increase, shocks and kicks appear when the gears are engaged. The motor also sags to the right side, which leads to accelerated wear of the right CV joint, because its normal position is also related to the normal position of the engine itself. The original right support costs about $190. On naturally aspirated engines with a displacement of 2.0 and 2.3 liters, traction disappears in hot weather. The engine literally suffocates due to the fact that the dampers in the intake manifold remain closed. This occurs due to a malfunction of one or both of the IMRC system vacuum valves. On the 2.3-liter engine, both valves are mounted directly on the intake manifold. On its younger brothers, they are near the ignition coil at the first cylinder. Both valves can be checked with a multimeter through their electrical connectors. For serviceable valves, the coil resistance is in the range of 30 to 70 ohms. The original IMRC valve in the Ford package, $5,243,591, costs about $50. In the Mazda package, $35. L80118741. There are a lot of substitutes. They're 2 to 3 times cheaper. Mondeo 4 is equipped with a hydraulic steering rack. A plastic mesh filter is installed in its inclined fitting, connected by a hose to the pump. It needs to be cleaned every time the fluid in the power steering system is replaced. Or you can replace the tank with a new one, 1,789,056. The power steering system uses original fluid, 1,781,003, at a price of $30 per liter. With a mileage of 150,000 kilometers, the support bearing of the right axle shaft often began to rustle. It's better not to delay replacing it, because subsequently, due to play in it, the right CV joint quickly wears out. If it has already reached the point of vibration while driving, then most likely the CV joint will have to be replaced along with the support bearing. There are two modifications of this bearing. The most common is the version with a rounded outer race, 1,701,597. But the Mondeo 4 with a 2.5-liter turbo engine has a flat outer bearing profile, 1,524,072. Choose carefully, although they are actually interchangeable. The original suspension bearing costs $100, and it's better to spend this amount, because even good substitutes do not last long and threaten to wear out the CV joint. On the Ford Mondeo 4 hydraulic steering rack, the clamping block is fixed with a plastic cap nut. This plug is easily squeezed out. By the way, its thread is deformed and the plug rises by several millimeters if you try to rip off a stubborn nut on the left tie rod without first securing it from rotation. This original plastic plug is replaced with a non-original machine metal one. Tightening the plug nut helps eliminate the knocking of the rack if its bushings are not worn. Sometimes the fans on Ford Mondeo 4s stop working. In most cases, the reason is in the control unit, which is attached directly to the diffuser. The original new unit is not sold separately from the frame with fans, but substitutes. 940,004,107 non-original units are available for sale. There are also blocks made in China, but they say they work for up to 6 months. The Ford Mondeo 4 suspension is reliable and simple. The weak point in it is considered to be the support bearings of the shock absorbers. Sometimes they last only 50,000 kilometers. Original support bearings, 1,539,863, cost $45. Bushings and stabilizer struts last even longer, up to 70,000 kilometers. Original stabilizer links cost $60, and bushings cost $13. The original front springs of the Mondeo 4 are rather weak, they sag quickly. Moreover, this is typical for cars with gasoline engines. They say that if you choose to replace the springs from the diesel version, they will last much longer. Original springs cost $370. The original front suspension arms are steel. The ball joint is held on by 3 rivets. The original lever, 1,507,182, will cost $370, but it also manages to run for 200,000 kilometers or more. Substitutes are 2 to 4 times cheaper. There are also non-original ball joints on sale, complete with 3 mounting bolts. The original rear silent block, 1,883,048, can be replaced separately. It will cost $95. The front wheel hubs are inseparable from the bearings. These parts on the Mondeo 4 last more than 150,000 kilometers and sell for $80. The rear hubs also come complete with bearings, 1,753,554. The original ones are incredibly expensive today. Even good replacements will cost $150, but they also serve more than 300,000 kilometers. There is nothing remarkable or weak in the rear suspension. Perhaps, with a mileage of more than 250,000 kilometers, you will have to replace the front silent blocks of the trailing arms, 1,865,034. They cost $90 apiece. The body of the Ford Mondeo 4 is well protected from corrosion. Usually, even wet winters with an abundance of reagents do not spoil the appearance of these cars. The roof panel does not have a layer of zinc, so chipped paint above the windshield fades quickly. What you should pay attention to is the cracked paint under the plastic mudguards. This is often where the bugs appear if the zinc layer has been rubbed down to the steel. Due to the friction of the bumper, as well as due to the bombardment of stones, entire flakes of paint often break off from the edges of the wings. The rear wheel arches are also under attack from moisture. If the pile lockers remain wet for a long time, then the metal in the arches begins to be affected by corrosion. Almost all Mondeo 4 sedans had broken trunk harness wires. They enter the trunk lid on the left and burst at the bend. In this case, the electrical consumers in the trunk lid stop working. Broken wires are relatively easy to repair. There is a rubber seal installed on the thresholds in the door openings. It opens easily when it is touched by shoes or if it freezes to the door after washing. After tearing off, it refuses to stay securely on its clips. 1,042,065. Ideally, you should buy a new one or a replacement. Some people use double-sided tape. The interior of the Ford Mondeo is spacious and well made. A cracked gear lever cover indicates age and intensity of use. If desired, you can sew and install a new one, even from genuine leather. A worn gearshift knob is also not uncommon. If it bothers you, then replace it with a new one. Also, over time, the seat belt begins to fluff up because it is rubbed by a latch worn to the metal. If the belt looks too shaggy, then it will have to be replaced with a used one. The seat belt height adjustment may also jam in the highest position. The adjustment mechanism in the cover post is not difficult to reach. If the damper is warped, it can be returned to its place and suitable material placed on both sides, which will prevent it from warping in the future. Over time, the buttons for turning on the heated front seats stop working. Their contact group is getting dusty. The buttons can be disassembled and cleaned. You can buy new ones, including and in China. A similar problem occurs with the steering wheel buttons. Either the joysticks do not respond to pressing, or the cruise control buttons work every once in a while. Cleaning the contacts on these buttons usually helps. To get to them, you need to remove the airbag. You can also buy new buttons. Non-original solutions are also offered in China. The buttons on the steering wheel have to be replaced because the metallic coating on them begins to swell. They say this is typical for the Belgian assembled Mondeo 4. The coating on the buttons adjacent to the emergency light button also swells. The hazard warning button itself usually gets worn out. The icon on it turns into a red spot. These buttons can be purchased at disassembly sites or new. Literally all Mondeo 4 have broken lumbar support in the driver's seat. Usually the wire spring breaks there, the stop is held on top. The cables that regulate the lumbar support may break. After this, the back of the seat in the driver's lumbar region seems to collapse. All these troubles can be eliminated with skillful hands. The wire can be replaced with something suitable, and the cables can be replaced. On the Mondeo 4 until 2012, electric seats began to creak and sway because the plastic bushings in the slides were bursting. Most likely this problem has already been completely solved, either under warranty or using traditional methods, when stronger bushings were installed in pair with the mounting screws. Bronze, for example,